9 a.m. and 5 p.m.
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the honourable member brings a good question, and the question is about what we're doing. Well, in fact, we've enhanced things around youth probation and youth intensive supervision of youth. We've improved our correctional services. In fact, Mr. Speaker, we put $6.1 million into an organized crime initiative in this province through Criminal Intelligence Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, we are serious about crime, we are serious about monitoring people on conditional sentences, and we're serious about protecting our workers.
Honourable Member for Richmond on your final supplementary.
You know, Mr. Speaker, no one's suggesting that the workers shouldn't be protected. In fact, what we're saying is bring back the program so that the workers can be protected and they can make the house visits between after 5 o'clock and on the weekends. The situation you have right now is that they have to call because they can't go to the houses, and that's, you know, we're not expecting them to go without protection. But for the minister to talk about youth crime and that, it's not only young offenders that are serving house arrest, Mr. Minister, and I know you have an obsession towards young offenders in this province, but there are others, and they're not all part of organized crime either. The fact is, again, that you have people serving house arrest that are not being properly supervised by this province. So I ask the minister again, will you put back Operation Shadow so that Nova Scotians can again know that house arrest means house arrest in Nova Scotia 24 hours a day?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I share the honourable member's interest in making sure that house arrest is effective. But you know, the most effective means of monitoring house arrest in many ways is when the people in the neighbourhood, because Mr. Speaker, no monitoring program can be there 24 hours a day. What is most effective for most times is because it's neighbors who see people who are under orders. If there's violation, we act on those violations and we monitor the people on house arrest.
The Honourable Member Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question again is for the Minister of Environment and Labour. Mr. Speaker, since 1996, the Cape Breton Regional Municipality has dug 11 deep water wells in the Myra district to feed the urban cores of the Cape Breton Regional Municipality. Since that time, nearly 25% of all the homes in the affected area where the wells have been dug have lost their water. My question to the Minister is, how many homes in the Myra district must lose their water before action is taken to stop this continued drawdown?
Honourable Minister of the Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the honourable member for the question. This is something, when the variance was issued some time ago, there was a great deal of discussion, and hydrogeologists were involved, and at that point in time it was not determined that there would be adverse effects to people's wells. In light of the information and information that's been passed to me, we certainly will be reviewing that prior to any decision being made.
Member Cape Breton West on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, the time frame for the variance has expired. That variance of an additional 300 liters or gallons of water per day has resulted in an additional 15 to 20 homes losing their water. That does not include the number of homes outside the affected area, because that's an artificial boundary that has been drawn. So my question to the Minister, given the information that he has surrounding that variance, and given the information that I'm sure the municipality and the residents and the local councillor, I've provided him with a letter of detailed information of the serious effects on this issue. Given all that information, will he give strong consideration to not approving that variance?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly will take into account all information that becomes available with regards to protecting water supplies, and as everybody in this House knows and in the province, securing water supplies for residents is of the utmost importance, and we will take all technical information into consideration as we move forward.
Honourable Member for Cape Breton West on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Minister well knows, and all members of this House know, without water, the value of their home is absolutely zero. We're talking about millions of dollars of lost property value, not to mention the loss of quality of life and so on. I would suggest to the Minister that perhaps he and his department would consider directing the municipality to go into the Coxheath Hills between Coxheath Mountain and the and Beachmont Hills, or to the East Bay Hills where there are natural aquifers. I would ask the minister if he would consult with the municipality and consider an alternate form of water resource so as to satisfy all stakeholders.
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I certainly appreciate any information and all information that is available, and I know that staff is working with the municipality, and we will continue to work to come up with an outcome that will be satisfactory to all parties involved.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question to you is to the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations. Yesterday, I presented a petition on behalf of some 3,470 residents of Pictou County calling on this government to regulate gasoline prices. And I understand there are other similar petitions circulating around the province. And what people are telling me is that they want regulation similar to the PEI and the Newfoundland models, where prices remain stable for defined periods of time and where people are assured their local community service station will remain viable. So through you, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, thousands of Nova Scotians are calling for stability in fuel prices by bringing back regulation in Nova Scotia. Mr. Minister, what action are you taking to make sure that this happens?
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member opposite would know that we have a bill that is currently in committee, and if the party opposite would support that piece of legislation and move it into the House, we could debate the merits of that legislation and then move forward with the initiative. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West on your first supplementary.
Well, I welcome that mention of that bill and certainly ask you to bring it forward. But our party certainly wants regulation as much as other Nova Scotians out there. Mr. Speaker, when we had our select committee on petroleum pricing last year, MLAs from all three parties here wanted regulation as a viable option. The Retail Gasoline Dealers Association of Nova Scotia strongly supports price regulation, and thousands of Nova Scotians are demanding regulation through various petitions. And certainly our party is prepared to present amendments to Bill 79, and so we're asking the minister to bring it forward, two law amendments, so we can deal with it. So my question to the minister, will you commit today to giving us a firm date when you'll bring before law amendments Bill 79?
Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't control the agenda of the Law Amendments Committee, but what I will say is that our party, the government, brought forward a piece of legislation that would enable us to regulate the industry. Their party, Mr. Speaker, is the party that stalled that piece of legislation and held it in committee. And, Mr. Speaker, I would say to Nova Scotians, if they really want that bill to move forward, they need to tell the NDP and the Liberals that it's important to move that piece of legislation forward so that we can move forward with this initiative on behalf of all Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, regulation of fuel prices on PEI in Newfoundland has stopped the trend to close gas stations. And in Nova Scotia, by contrast, more than half of our gas stations have already closed. We had over 1,000, now we have less than 500. Let's get on and get regulation in this province. Bring Bill 79 forward. And Mr. Minister, when are you going to finally stand up for Nova Scotians and our Nova Scotia communities, or are you going to continue to sit and do nothing?
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I would describe that as an unfair statement, Mr. Speaker. We brought forward a piece of legislation that would enable government to regulate. That party blocked that piece of legislation in committee, and I'm asking them to step out of the way so that we can do the work we need to do on behalf of Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker. They're being unfair to Nova Scotians, and we're out here to protect Nova Scotians' interests, Mr. Speaker, not that party.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Energy and MLA for Cape Breton North has asked the Education Minister to get involved and settle a strike by workers in the Cape Breton Victoria School Board. So, Mr. Premier, there's obviously a cabinet dispute here between the member for Cape Breton North and the Education Minister. I'd like to know, Mr. Premier, and Nova Scotians would like to know, which cabinet minister position are you in favour of?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Cabinet is in complete agreement that the sooner this strike is settled, the better for the workers, the better for students, and the better for the people of Cape Breton Island. And we believe that the proposition by the local school board, the Cape Breton Victoria School Board, to offer binding arbitration, something that our cabinet supports, will achieve all of the objectives that are important to the workers, that are important to the students, and important to the school board and the local people of Cape Breton Victoria.
The honourable member Cape Breton South on your first supplementary.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, funding inequities to the Cape Breton Victoria Board are the problem. The only way this is going to be settled is if the Minister of Education, the Premier, and the member from Cape Breton North all get together and agree that this board needs more funding in order to give these workers an equitable settlement and give them justice in their workplace. It's not going to happen until this government gets involved and does that. And I might remind the Premier that the option of binding arbitration was already turned down by the workers. So my question to the Premier is, what are you going to do about the inequities in the funding of that board, Mr. Premier?
Order, please. Time allotted for question period has expired. Opposition members' business. The honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, would you please call resolution number 3051?
Resolution number 3051. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as we've seen here today...
Order, please. Order, please. Would the honourable member allow for an introduction?
Yes.
The honourable Minister of Community Services on introduction.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member opposite for his indulgence. Mr. Speaker, here in the gallery today, we have a friend of mine, a friend of all Nova Scotians, actually, John Dunsworth, also known as Mr. Leahy on the hit television series, The Trailer Park Boys. And I would tell you, Mr. Speaker, he's a pretty good contract bridge player because I've taken him on once for a charitable cause, and it cost me $56. So, John, would you please stand up and accept the warm welcome of the House?
Thank you. We certainly welcome our special guest to gallery today, the honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in my place to talk about the situation in Cape Breton that currently exists regarding the school strike, the school board strike. Mr. Speaker, as we've seen throughout question period today, both the Minister of Education and now the Premier of this province, Mr. Speaker.
Order. I wonder if you would allow for an introduction.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to get on with the debate of the day. It's a rather important issue.
Very well. And
some members may not be willing to take it seriously, but I am. We're talking about the education of children back home in Cape Breton. We're talking about workers that are out on a picket line, and I'm not willing to give up my time right now to do some introductions in this House. It's a serious situation. My children are affected, and the children of a lot of other people back home. And it's time that this government paid attention to what's going on in Cape Breton. So, Mr. Speaker, what we've seen in question period today, and what we've seen from both the Premier and the Minister of Education, is nothing but some glib answers, totally dismissing the concerns of workers from the Cape Breton Victoria Regional District School Board. And by doing that, they're ignoring every concern from back home, from every parent that's concerned about this issue as well right now. We are simply weeks away from the end of the school year right now. And that's going to mean, if this strike continues to drag on, that there are going to be students who will not graduate. They will not graduate from high school this year, Mr. Speaker. It means they miss out, as they're missing out on now, of course, their education and all other extracurricular activities that go with it. Graduating students are going to miss out on their proms. They're going to miss out on the parties, the various safe grad parties that had been planned. And they're going to put 13 years of education in jeopardy, Mr. Speaker, because this government simply doesn't care. This government, Mr. Speaker, likes to talk about fairness. And they've campaigned on fairness. The Premier himself is a big fan of fairness. Well, how about fairness in this case, Mr. Speaker? How about fairness for students and fairness for workers? You know, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Education is no stranger to confrontation. He's no stranger to confrontation in a strike situation. It's this Minister of Education who just happened to be the Minister of Health during Bill 68. And I'm sure the Minister remembers that. during Bill 68 when he forced nurses back to work in this province, Mr. Speaker. And I hope not for a second, I hope that this government and this minister, now the Minister of Education, then the Minister of Health, is thinking that if they prolong this long enough, that eventually they're going to go down the road of legislating workers back to this province. Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that the Liberal caucus didn't stand for it during Bill 68, and we will not stand for it during this current labour dispute either. So my message to the Minister of Education, Mr. Speaker, would be don't even go there. Don't even think about going there. Because right now the ball is in your court. It's not good enough to stand in this legislature time after time after time, as you have today, and say, well, we've put an offer of binding arbitration before the school board. They're the employer. Mr. Speaker, as the Premier knows and as the Minister knows, the province funds school boards. You are the employer of the workers in the Cape Breton-Victoria District School Board. You have to take responsibility for what's happening there right now. And I can't believe, Mr. Speaker, for a minute, I can't believe what's actually happening in this case, that the Minister of Education says, well, we made an offer, the school board has made an offer, it's not up to me, it's now up to the district school board, and if they don't accept the offer, whatever happens, happens, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yesterday I used a phrase to describe what was going on here, both in the House and outside of the House, and I said what's actually happening here is a sin. Now, it's a strong statement, Mr. Speaker, it's a strong statement, but at the same time, what's happening back home, when you have 18,500 kids who are no longer attending classes, Mr. Speaker, that is a sin. This is a serious situation. But the government is not treating it as a serious situation, Mr. Speaker. The government is treating it as, I think anyway, in their opinion, as just a labor dispute that perhaps if they stall long enough will eventually work itself out. It's not good enough, Mr. Speaker. It's not good enough for the people of Cape Breton or the children who are being denied an education right now. Mr. Speaker, this government has neglected our children, and the whole student body in the Cape Breton-Victoria District School Board is suffering because of the inaction of this government. The solution should be very clear, Mr. Speaker. The solution should be very clear to the Minister of Education. Simply fund the school board properly, and you won't be in this predicament. Simply provide the funding that should be there for a declining enrollment that's taking place. And Mr. Speaker, you can give an indication there are people who have traveled here today for 6 hours on a bus to come up to protest this situation. They shouldn't have to be here. They should be home, going to their jobs. They should be home with their families. But they took the opportunity to come here and hear a question period and hear our debate about this situation, Mr. Speaker. It is a shame, it is a sin for those workers, for the students that are involved. This strike is nothing more than simply a tragedy, Mr. Speaker, and it should not have happened. It should never have been allowed to get to the situation, to get to the point where it is right now. Mr. Speaker, there are people who are being hurt here, and there are people, as I mentioned the other night, there are students with special needs who are being especially hurt in this situation because they can no longer get the care that they require. They can no longer attend school because all of the schools, with the exception of one, are now closed in Cape Breton, Mr. Speaker. That's an absolute disgrace that this situation has been allowed to get to where it is right now. Again, Mr. Speaker, it's a question of fairness. Why can't you be fair in treating the workers of Cape Breton the same as you would treat workers in Halifax or Yarmouth or anywhere else in this province, Mr. Speaker? What's wrong with paying equal pay for work of equal value, Mr. Speaker? Can the Minister of Education please tell me what's wrong with that principle? But again, as I said, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Education is no stranger to confrontation here. And he's taken it on the chin before, and maybe he's willing to take another one on the chin this time around and just say, well, you know, the government has put me out front, and I'm willing to take one for the team, so to speak, and let workers stay out on the picket line for however long it takes until we finally break them down and they go back to work. But I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, from talking to some of the strikers outside today who have made the long trip to Halifax, It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Their resolve is stronger than it's ever been during the day, since the day that they walked out on strike. And an indication of that was the other night when the proposed agreement was put in front of them, and it was more than 2-1 against that, against it. The minister said today that, let's consider binding arbitration. The union has already said from day one they don't want binding arbitration. They don't want it. But the minister, well, if the government members have an answer to it, stand up. I want to hear you concerned about Cape Breton too. You haven't opened your mouths during the whole thing, so don't open it now, because you could care less about Cape Breton, and that's the whole problem. If this strike was happening anywhere else in this province, it wouldn't be dragging on as long as it is right now. And that's a fact. And you'll have another strike coming up in the Strait area. You'll have all of Cape Breton schools closed and out on strike, and you'll all sit over there with your silly little smirks, and you don't care about the fact that it's happening, Mr. Speaker. You don't care. You don't care. If you cared, you'd be up and you'd be talking about it, you'd be putting pressure on the minister, and you'd be telling the other ministers, get this strike settled, because we're a government that cares, and we want to be fair to everybody in this province. But you're not being fair. Instead, you put out Mr. Confrontation to take the heat, because he can do it. He forced Bill 68 on us. He forced nurses back to work. He didn't give a damn about the nurses, and he doesn't give a damn about these strikers right now, Mr. Speaker. And that's a fact of life.
Order.
That's a fact of life.
Order. Comments are unparliamentary. I'd ask the honourable member to retract that statement.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry, I retract the words, but let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, this minister and this government over this issue are going down. That's what's going to happen. You're going down, Mr. Minister, and it's going to happen over this strike, because people will not forget. They will not forget. They haven't forgotten Bill 68 and how you forced nurses back to work in this province, and they will not forget, come election day, how you are forcing them out on a picket line and how you are keeping our children from getting their education, from graduating, from attending school, from enjoying the last days of summer in school, Mr. Speaker. They will not forget that this minister did it. And he'll go down, and so will that government, Mr. Speaker, eventually. They'll remember, let me tell you, they'll remember what's going on in this situation. And all the backbenchers who like to chirp in the back, Mr. Speaker, okay, we won't be hearing from them anymore, because they won't be around either. This is the kind of issue that I take personally, Mr. Speaker. I guess I'm a little emotional. This affects my family, this affects my friends and my neighbors. This is a strike that has hit home, and it's a strike that has affected children. Is anything more serious than the education of our children in this province? Absolutely nothing should interfere with that, Mr. Speaker. But because of the inaction, and the unfairness of this government, it's led to this. I said yesterday, and I'll say it again, wage parity is not a new issue that just all of a sudden popped up. Wage parity has been around for some time, the whole issue itself. But the Minister of Education ignored it, as he ignores it now. And I can't for the life of me, Mr. Speaker, I can't understand. There are Cape Breton members in that cabinet over there, but you wouldn't know it. You wouldn't know it, because we haven't heard from them in here on the situation. No, I haven't heard from it. All I heard is you spouting the same line as the Minister of Education. Oh, we should accept binding arbitration. What a pile of baloney. You're just, the member from Cape Breton North, all he does is follow in line like a little puppy dog, following the mummy dog, and following along and saying, come this way. That's all the member for Cape Breton North does. That's all he does. That's all he's done since he's been put in this legislature. He has to stand on his feet and defend Cape Breton, and he hasn't done it, Mr. Speaker. He has not done it. And this, again, let me tell you, the people back home will remember it. The people back home will remember it, and they'll remember the actions or the inaction of this government, the inaction of the Premier, the inaction of the Education Minister. They'll remember that, as I said, if you're going to put our children's education in jeopardy as you have, and put an entire school year, and in some cases, an entire education, an entire 13 years. If you thought about anything, think about just alone the students who are going to graduate this year. Think about them alone. Surely that would be enough to say we've got to do something extra special in this case to put those workers back to work and to put those kids back in the classroom, Mr. Speaker. This government simply doesn't care about this. If they did, we wouldn't be talking about this situation, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Recognize the Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'm pleased to be able to rise for a few minutes and to talk to this, both this important matter that is important to the lives of young people in Cape Breton, to the lives of those workers who are CUPE members in the Cape Breton Victoria District School Board or Regional School Board. Mr. Speaker, one of the things I guess I have to first address some of the comments made by the member from Glace Bay.
Order. Just before you get into that, Minister, would you allow some time for an introduction? Yes, thank you. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to introduce to you and through you to all members of the House two gentlemen in the West Gallery. Jeff Aiken, who is the Chief Financial Officer for the Student Union at, I suppose, UCCB, soon to be Cape Breton University, and also Scott Thomas, who is the President of the Student Union at UCCB, and also the President of the Cape Breton West Liberal Association. And I would ask if all members would give the warm approbation and acknowledgement to these two fine gentlemen.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Education.
I too, Mr. Speaker, would like to welcome the members in the gallery, and I should add, Mr. Speaker, that I will be sharing my time with the member from Cape Breton North. Mr. Speaker, turning to some of the comments from the member from Glace Bay, you know, there were at least 3 members of his caucus that supported the idea of an outside agent helping the parties come to a decision. In other words, binding arbitration. I think I heard it come from the member from Victoria the other day. The member from Cape Breton South said it in the media, and the education critic, I believe, as well, made that pitch. And I'm really surprised, Mr. Speaker, that rather than supporting binding arbitration, which would put the students back in the classroom in the most expeditious way, that this member is up there with political mischief to try and instead of trying to help. Trying to belong the strike, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, he should be ashamed of that attitude. He should have accepted that option. We asked yesterday in the House that all members of all parties endorse binding arbitration to get the students back into school. Mr. Speaker, all members of all parties, and there were at least 3 members of that party, Mr. Speaker, who did support that, and I don't know what happened when the offer came on the table. All of a sudden they disappeared. Beg pardon? You know, I completely support the board's offer to CUPE to go to binding arbitration with staff returning to work. Mr. Speaker, I agree with the school board's offer, as does this government. It's a good way to get the students back in the classroom and get the staff back to work. Mr. Speaker, this is an unfortunate situation. There's no question about that. Mr. Speaker, I would remind the members of the House, as I have in response to questions, I'm concerned about this, but I want to tell members again that there were CUPE locals in 3 other parts of the province, Mr. Speaker, who accepted similar offers without outside intervention. We believe in the collective bargaining process, and we do believe that the matter can be settled at the bargaining table, and if not in the bargaining table right now, through the offer of binding arbitration. You know, to take the outstanding issues to an outside thing. Mr. Speaker, I met with 6 representatives, 6 members of the CUPE, I believe it's 50-50, I'm sorry, today. And 4 of the members were representatives of their bargaining team. Mr. Speaker, one of the things that became clear is that not everybody who is a member of CUPE understood what binding arbitration meant. You know, there were people who said, well, the board had no more money, Mr. Speaker, and this was the government's commitment. If the arbitrator, whomever it might be, makes a decision that the workers are entitled, should be awarded a greater wages than that which was offered by the school board in the negotiations, then the government would see that there was sufficient money allocated to the school board to pay that what the arbitrator awarded. You know, there was an understanding, and I would hope that the members of the opposition, Mr. Speaker, would help the workers understand that binding arbitration means binding arbitration. You know, you aren't going to go back and say that there's not enough money to pay that, or the school board doesn't have the funds to do that. Mr. Speaker, when the government endorsed the proposal of the Cape Breton Victoria District School Board, we accepted that responsibility. I can tell you too, Mr. Speaker, that we hoped that the union is still considering the offer of binding arbitration, that they are actively considering it, and they will ask their members if they want binding arbitration. You know, as I understand that the initial reaction of the executive or the negotiating team or whatever would be representing that CUPE in that decision-making process did not go to the membership with that offer. And we would ask that they take it to the membership. We think it's a reasonable approach to a very, very difficult situation. Mr. Speaker, although not all categories of or classifications of workers in the Cape Breton Victoria School Board are in a earn wages that would say that they are highest in the province, there are a number of the workers there who are at or above the provincial average, Mr. Speaker. And I think that has to be recognized. A lot of the comments on the floor of this House, or I've heard, say that, you know, everybody in that board, the representatives of that board, everybody in that board has the lowest wages in the province, and clearly that was just not the case, Mr. Speaker. No, there's no question that there are some categories where others through negotiation have reached a greater wage, but on the other hand, the CUPE workers there in some categories are greater than their colleagues in other parts of the province. And that's what collective negotiations are, Mr. Speaker. A give and a take. A give and a take. But what we have to keep in mind foremost is the interest of the students. Mr. Speaker, we unfortunately have a large number of students who are out. You know, the offer of binding arbitration is the one that would put them back in the classrooms the quickest. If the CUPE accepted binding arbitration and the workers went back and cleaned the schools, and we could have the students back in the schools by Friday, Mr. Speaker. You know, it's a sad situation, but I just wish, and I wish I could say with confidence, that the members of the Cape Breton members of the Liberal caucus were supporting binding arbitration, because at least 2 of them have called for it. They have called for it. Mr. Speaker, you know, I don't think they work. They encourage the workers to really fully examine binding arbitration and the benefits it would bring. Mr. Speaker, I asked the member from Glace Bay yesterday in question period, would he support binding arbitration, and he ran a rabbit track all around the question. You know, he wouldn't stand up and be counted. He wouldn't stand up and be counted for the workers in Cape Breton. He wouldn't stand up and be counted and say, let's help get these students back to school. desk down. You know, he wouldn't stand up to be counted and go back and say, look, folks, I think this is an appropriate thing.
Point of order, the honourable member for Glace Bay.
Speaker, I'll stand up and point out to the minister that, hello, the union turned down binding arbitration. Do you know anything about this strike at all, Mr. Minister? Do you understand that at the table, the union turned it down?
Order. Order. It's not a point of order. The honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I believe the invitation was extended to the honourable member before there was any indication that it was turned down. Mr. Speaker, I really regret the situation in the Cape Breton Victoria School Board. As Minister of Education, indeed as a parent, I know what it's like when your children are denied access to school. I also understand that the workers don't want to be on the picket line. There is a mechanism that has been proposed that would see the students back to school and the workers off the picket line, Mr. Speaker, and I hope it will be accepted. I'm going to now turn the floor over to the member from Cape Breton North.
Thank you. The honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm glad to be able to join with my colleague, the Honourable Minister of Education, to speak to this debate this afternoon. And I want to say that everyone is concerned. There's no one in this House, as I said the other evening when we had an opportunity to speak to this with the emergency debate that the Liberal caucus brought forward and all parties wanted to see in the House, Mr. Speaker, and we rose to our feet to talk about this, unlike the member from Glace Bay's suggestions toward this. We've talked about it in our communities, we've talked about it within our caucus, and we're talking about it on the floor of this legislature, and we're listening, Mr. Speaker, and we're trying all to work towards a common outcome with regards to getting a resolution as fast as possible and getting students in the classrooms and the workers back at work. And we also recognize, Mr. Speaker, that there is in any negotiated process a desire to have a fair and equitable outcome and the balance that's necessary in any labor dispute. And there is no one that would deter from wanting to see that outcome achieved. And as the minister indicated, there is a collective bargaining process, and as he said the other night, had government stepped in and tried to force an early resolution, we would have been chastised by the same member from Glace Bay over there that would say that we're interrupting the process. And Mr. Speaker, there is a process in place. It is the collective bargaining process. People are endorsing getting to binding arbitration and to resolve some of the wider issues, and there are issues that are part of this labor dispute that are not just isolated to the Cape Breton District School Board, Victoria District School Board. Mr. Speaker, there are issues that do become wider, and those have been identified by CUPE and the members as they speak to parity, but as you know, there are a number of school boards in this province with various negotiating units in place. The processes have to be respected in those boards, and we're trying to respect the one in the Cape Breton Victoria District School Board as well. And Mr. Speaker, we're doing everything we can to make sure that all sides come back as soon as possible and recognize that there are wider issues that have to be addressed, and to make sure that we do go about just doing that as well. And it's not going to be done by trying to get up in this House, as the member from Glace Bay has done, and try to chastise everyone else, Mr. Speaker, that we're not doing things when in fact process is in place and things are moving forward. You know, Mr. Speaker, I hope we'll see a resolve as soon as possible, immediately, and I'm hoping that as talks continue and people work for resolve, we'll get this accomplished, that there will be a fair deal and a fair outcome from everybody, Mr. Speaker, on this. And as a local member, a member from the region, who cares about the people from his region, who desires to see a positive outcome here and recognizes that it isn't as easy as waving a magical wand like the member from Glace Bay would suggest as they get up in this House and try to berate everyone else. But Mr. Speaker, when I didn't notice, Mr. Speaker, from here, as the member from Glace Bay barks off over there, Mr. Speaker, I didn't notice the stamp, the patent pending stamp on the member from Glace Bay's forehead, that they've got their market cornered on compassion and understanding and caring in this province, because if that's the same Liberal Party, Mr. Speaker, he represents a Liberal brand, Mr. Speaker, that cared so much. They cared so much that they rolled back wages in this province, Mr. Speaker. They froze wages. They force people to take days off, Mr. Speaker. They gutted funding to education. They gutted funding to roads. They gutted economic development in this province, Mr. Speaker. That's why they ended up third place, not once, but twice recently, because they have not proven to Nova Scotians that they have the only, Mr. Speaker, the only patent pending, Mr. Speaker, for that member from Glace Bay is third place. Not caring, not compassion. We're doing the necessary things, and we care enough to come to this chamber to debate the issues of this province. But I'm not going to sit by, Mr. Speaker, and listen to Liberals suggest that they have some moral authority over this chamber and they can talk about labor disputes for some righteous manner, because the Liberal Party is the last party in this province that should get up and talk about fairness in the workplace. When they gutted fairness, they took it away and they didn't follow due process. We're following due process, Mr. Speaker, and the member from Glace Bay cannot talk about due process. Mr. Speaker, the people deserve better than what the member from Glace Bay is going on about. But I thank, Mr. Speaker, the people of this province that want an outcome, and this government's committed to achieving that, and I'll take on the member from Glace Bay any day, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Order. The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I begin my remarks, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce two people in your gallery, Mr. Speaker.
Very well.
Billy Marsh and Connor Oliver, two constituents of mine who are fine gentlemen, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to see them rise and seek the approval of the House, Mr. Speaker.
Indeed, welcome to all members in the gallery today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now I'm left to follow those virtues of Paragon when it comes to collective bargaining, Mr. Speaker. How they bleed for the people on the streets, Mr. Speaker. But this is an interesting debate, because one is ramped beyond, and the other it doesn't understand the basics. So let's get back to some basics ideas, Mr. Speaker. The fact of the matter is that the minister talks about collective bargaining and respecting that right, and then wants to use the hammer of binding arbitration, which the one side has rejected. And one could say rejected soundly, Mr. Speaker. So the option is not there. And I must go down and give the minister a little idea of, the reason for that, Mr. Speaker, because what we're talking about here is the ability of both parties to get a collective agreement. Collective agreements or collective bargaining is a basic premise of the trade union movement. They have to be allowed to get at that freely. And it's recognized in the Department of Labor by the conciliation process and so on. And the idea that an arbitrator could have understood the issues at any greater level than the two sides that were at the table is clearly not accurate. We're not talking here about neither party knowing their position. Clearly, both parties knew their position, and the public knew their position. So there was no coming forward. Now the fact of the matter is that the minister accepted the board's position on binding arbitration. The problem with it was that he says he recognized it, but he didn't go that other degree, is that we'll open the purse strings, which the union had wanted all along, which made virtually arbitration then a non-necessity, not a necessity, because if he came to the table in the way he should, arbitration is not the point. The point is that most people agree that collective bargaining should be held from a province-wide perspective, not a board-to-board perspective. And that's what we're there. Arbitration will not get us to that point. Arbitration will not get these workers to that point, will not get this province to that point. And that's where I would like to see the minister understand that view of arbitration. Mr. Speaker, trade unions in this province, in particular in the last 15 years, have been put down with wage rollbacks, wage freezes on collective bargaining, and that's why we see the overall basic level of common sense around collective bargaining being eroded. Because people have been indeed pushing the option since the wage freezes of the mid-90s and trying to play catch-up. We know, workers know, and legislators should full know that the way to balancing your books is not on the backs of our public sector workers. It just doesn't make sense. Because soon as you get back at the table, you'll get back to where you were, and indeed the acrimony at that table and the rhetoric at that table becomes such that you can't get a fair and balanced collective agreement. That's the problem we're dealing with here. We're not dealing with the sins of a couple of years ago, Mr. Speaker. We're dealing with the sins of the mid-90s, when workers were denied the basic right of collective bargaining. It was in my party that the member from South says we'll never get that opportunity. No, it wasn't that party, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the people of Nova Scotia will decide who gets to sit where, and not the member from Cape Breton South. And Mr. Speaker, that's where it's at. And if he wants to go on a debate of representing workers, I'm sure as heck will represent them. And I didn't put CUPE strikers in Sydney on strike when I was mayor, because I never was mayor. So let's be honest about that. So, Mr. Speaker, let's not go around with this heart in our sleeve and tell everybody what great guys we are when it comes to this idea of collective bargaining. Because what I said to you earlier, it's a term used now that where public sector workers find themselves not in collective bargaining, but in collective begging. These are workers, some of the lowest paid workers in this province, Mr. Speaker, barely making over the minimum wage. They're a group of employees, Mr. Speaker, who very seldom work over 20 hours a week because of their job descriptions. There's a group of workers there seeking common dignity that the negotiator has said to the negotiating team. The negotiator for the school board said, I will slit my wrists before part-time workers get benefits. That's a shame, Mr. Speaker, to say that about workers. That's no way to bargain. Those people, Mr. Speaker, are out there trying the best they can to participate in the economy of this province. And for a hired gun by the Cape Breton Victoria Regional School Board to tell workers that he will slit his wrists rather than see them get a raise, Mr. Speaker, is unconscionable. But yet he gets away with that. A person that has no moral right to be at that table. He does not represent the workers. He does not represent the school board in any elective capacity or hired capacity. He's a hired gun, Mr. Speaker, who is bringing a message of chasm to that school board, Mr. Speaker, who I would say a large share of the responsibility rests on that person's shoulders for not being forthright with workers, being more worried about his income, Mr. Speaker. I would dare tell everybody on both sides of this House today that negotiator's salary hasn't been impacted by the set of negotiations, that he still received his, whether they were to collectively bargain in a responsible way or an irresponsible way. There was nothing in it for that person to find yes in this, Mr. Speaker. And indeed, that's what this is all about. Many times, and many more times in the future, that I'll lock horns with the Minister of Education over many issues, Mr. Speaker. But I want to, if I could, if I've not gone too far, is to ramp down the rhetoric a bit, Mr. Speaker. And I ask the Minister here in this House today to help facilitate to get these people back together, Minister, whether it's through the veil, how you see it, or how the union sees it. But I think there's a responsibility there, and I would think that both sides would agree with that, Mr. Speaker, that we have to find a resolve. you know, maybe there'll be other speeches, like as I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, that I won't be as kind to the minister on this one. And I think, you know, he dropped the ball a few times, and I've really got to bite my tongue here not to really give him a 2x4 across the head. But, you know, Mr. Speaker, I don't think that's what we need a velvet glove about now to get this resolved. And that's what I want to see from his department and the people that are involved with this, to get the sides together, to make sure that there's an agreement there, make sure that, you know, that what's being said, whether it's coming from the Liberal benches, the official opposition's benches, or the government benches, that it's accurate, that we get the information that we know. We go to the source. We make sure that we get to the school board and see their side. Make sure we talk to the union and get their side, Mr. Speaker. That's what we need to know. We got to know that we're dealing with credible information, that the information we have in front of us is stuff that we can say, look, we've got to make a large decision here to make sure the most important thing, clearly from my background in the trade union movement, I guess the easiest thing for me to say is to make sure that the workers get everything they want. Well, Mr. Speaker, that's not what I'm going to say. I think the workers will get what they negotiate, and I hope they will get a good agreement. But I think they, with me, agree at this point is what they want to see is they want to see themselves back in those schools, back in those cafeterias, back in the schoolyards, doing what they love to do, looking after the children of the Cape Breton-Victoria Regional School Board, because that's what it's about. You know, it's the real shame here is we're not talking about a proverbial widget factory, and there's no human cost. Well, Mr. Speaker, as I said on Monday night, there's a real human cost here. There's a human cost, obviously, to the strikers and the economic impact that they're willing to bear for a just settlement. There's a social component for those students out there that are preparing to go to university next year. There's a social cost for those innocent children of special needs that need the helpful instruction, that aren't getting it, Mr. Speaker. This is the real cost, and this is what we have to be driven by. Mr. Speaker, I understand fully that we just can't throw money, whatever side of the house we're on is not responsible just to throw money at a problem. But indeed, what we find ourselves here, because of the inequities of the past, is we see no other alternative but for the Department of Education to get involved in a substantive way, and that substantive way has to be financial. We all recognize, as the board recognizes, as the union recognizes, that problem can't be solved at the Cape Breton-Victoria School Board alone. It can't be resolved in the Strait Area Board alone. And indeed, in 20 months' time, when other agreements come open, same thing. So what we have to do, Mr. Speaker, is look at this in more of a holistic way and say, how can we bring these sides together, everybody, from Yarmouth to Cape North, Mr. Speaker, how can we put together a package that would allow these people the dignity in their workplace that they deserve? And in reality, we'd like to say money doesn't matter, but in reality, it does. These people love their work, but also love of their work doesn't put a chicken in the pot, Mr. Speaker. That's the reality, that you can't go into Sobeys or Super Value and tell them what a good worker you are, and they're going to give you anything extra, Mr. Speaker. It is, when the rubber hits the road, it's salary. It's clear and simple as that, Mr. Speaker. So what we want from this government is a clear indication that they will participate in finding a resolution. They will participate in getting to yes. That's what we need here. We don't need the rhetoric of my side, of the third-party side, of the government side. What we need is the reality of having an offer on the table that has the vision of the whole province, that's not short in vision with just one school board or even two school boards. It has to have a vision that sees clearly from one end of the province to the other, Speaker. So this is what we want this government to do. We will support this government in doing this. We want you to go forward. We want you to put an olive branch out to both of these parties. Use the power of your good office, Minister, to come together with these folks and find the solution. Find the yes in the mess, because that's what we need, Mr. Speaker. We want workers in our schools that are paid appropriately, and more importantly, we want the kids back in our school, Mr. Speaker, so they can learn, be educated, and participate in this great province. Because, Mr. Speaker, no matter who sits on the government side, one thing I can say, this is the greatest province in this country, Mr. Speaker, and I'm proud to be a Nova Scotian. I'm always proud to be a Nova Scotian. I may disagree with that government from time to time, but what I want to say, there's days I'm more proud than others, and I want this government to make me proud. I want this government to do the thing, make the workers proud, and sit down with them and get an equitable agreement, Mr. Speaker. That's what I want. That's your challenge, Minister. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it was our party that introduced this resolution for discussion here today, as well as the emergency debate that took place here Monday evening. And I believe, Mr. Speaker, that we've brought the current situation with the strike to the attention of members of the House on the last few occasions that we've had to do that, including question period today. And I certainly don't want to ramp the rhetoric up any more than it's already been ramped up this afternoon. But I do want reason to prevail here when we're talking about this strike and the plight of the workers that are out on the picket lines here and the children who are not in school. Let's not lose sight of the situation here and what has happened. I thought, Mr. Speaker, today in this House during question period, the government were sadly lacking in their response to the questions put forward by both opposition parties regarding the plight of the workers on the picket line. The constant reference, Mr. Speaker, from the Minister of Education to the fact that binding arbitration was asked for by the school board, somebody either neglected to inform the minister or the minister conveniently forgot that he was told that the workers turned that option down. And I continue to ask, what is it about that he doesn't understand? That option, Mr. Speaker, is no longer on the table. As a matter of fact, the current situation is there are no options on the table right now because it's obvious that this government doesn't want to deal at all with this issue, even though, Mr. Speaker, even though a member of the Executive Council from Cape Breton called upon the Minister of Education to become involved. The Minister of Education states he's not becoming involved. I believe that the Minister of Energy knew full well that would be the answer of the Minister of Education. And Mr. Premier, or I asked the Premier, Mr. Speaker, which position in Cabinet did he favor? The position of the Minister of Energy or the position of the Minister of Education? Another glib answer from the Premier. I always thought, Mr. Speaker, that if Cabinet Ministers went afoul of government policy, that they should do the honourable thing and resign from the Cabinet. That was always the mantra by which cabinets would operate. If you disagree with government policy on an issue, then you should be prepared to stand up and defend that. That is why in a resolution earlier today, I called upon the Minister of Energy to resign his position in Cabinet because he obviously feels very much different than the Premier and the Minister of Education. Now, I don't expect the Minister of Energy to do that. I don't expect that because he knew, Mr. Speaker, what the answer to his question was going to be before he put it to the Minister of Education. He is trying to give the illusion to the people of Cape Breton that he's on their side. Well, if he wants to give that assurance to the people of Cape Breton, the people that are out on strike, then he should stand up for them by resigning from this cabinet. If he doesn't agree with the government policy, he has an obligation to step aside from his cabinet position and assume his place as the Minister for Cape Breton North and stand up and defend the people of Cape Breton. If he's not prepared to do that, then his gratuitous statement early about asking the Minister to get involved doesn't mean anything. And for the Premier to allow two cabinet ministers to have different points of view in the public, I ask the Premier, which is the government's point of view here? Which is the government's point of view? It's obvious to me this government doesn't want to get involved at all. Now, Mr. Speaker, we know what the problem is here. We know what the problem is. This board has been underfunded for years because of declining enrollment. The Premier said he was going to correct that in 1999. The education system in this province was going to be greatly improved, and boards that were facing inequities in funding were going to be beefed up with adequate funding. Adequate funding, Mr. Speaker, to enable the Cape Breton Victoria Board to pay the striking workers a half-decent wage increase and, more importantly, make sure that they have jobs there in the future. Neither one is guaranteed right now. They don't know if they're going to get a half-decent wage increase, nor do they know they're going to have jobs in the future. And I suggest to you, Mr. Speaker, both of these issues have to be addressed by this government. Both of these issues can be addressed by the government admitting the funding is not sufficient to the Cape Breton Victoria Board to do the job. The government knows that. The government knows that we've had a terrible situation with declining enrollments in that board for the past number of years. And that decline is continuing. And as long as the education dollars chase the numbers in the system, we're going to have a problem in the Cape Breton Victoria Board. The government has to address that inequity. Now, we've reached a situation here where the workers have turned down binding arbitration because there was nothing projected out in the future. This was a one-stop gap to solve this problem to get the workers back to work. No assurance that this will be employed in the future. No guarantees from the union that their concerns will be listened in the future. No guarantees except get this off the front page of the newspapers. That's all that's happening here. But the workers turned it down. And the minister knew that before he addressed this problem here today. The minister knew that. Yet he's trying to blame the opposition parties, particularly Liberal members, who he said were in agreement with binding arbitration. What we said is, if the union wants it, we'll go along with it. That's what we said. But the union turned it down. So we're saying it's up to the ball is clearly back in the government's court here. Mr. Minister, you are responsible for the education of children in this province. You are the education minister, not the chairman of the Cape Breton Victoria Board, not the member from Cape Breton North, not the Premier, not the members of the Executive Council, not we on this side of the House, but you, Mr. Minister. You are the custodian of the education system in this province, and by the way, an education system that is the second most poorly funded system in Canada, that has failing grades in just about anywhere you want to go. Yet in 1999, the Tories' own Blue Book said, we're going to correct that. Yep. Well, this is 2005.
More money.
More money. Where's it at? This is 2005. This is 6 years later, and it's still not addressed. The funding in the board is still facing a shortfall.
Order.
Now, the minister...
Order, the Honourable Minister, on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, I know the mathematics a little off, but I just want to inform the members that the time this government has been in power, the per pupil expenditure has gone up 50%.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South. You have the floor.
The numbers really show it. The results really show it, Jamie. Oh. Okay.
Mr. Speaker, that was a fine point of order, but it doesn't alter the fact. The funding is still the worst in Canada. Per capita, the education system. You can wax eloquent all you want about the funding. You're still the worst in Canada, Mr. Minister. They're not my figures. You know, what a weak response. The Cape Breton Victoria Board, if he wants to talk about something, he can talk about the inequities in funding to that board, Mr. Speaker. But I remind you, Mr. Speaker, that this problem is not going to go away in this board because the enrollments are getting less and less in this board, and we still have difficulties keeping the education system intact in this particular board. Minister of Energy and the member from Cape Breton North knows that. He met with the board, as did we. And he heard the plight of the board, as did we. And we knew at that time there was an impasse coming, and so did he. The government had an opportunity here to stop this impasse by allowing the board further financial means to deal with this crisis. As I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, this government can find money when it wants to for various business organizations, or it can write off millions of dollars in loans at will, but it can't find a few dollars to give a half-decent increase to the people working in the Cape Breton Victoria School Board. Shame on this government for that. Shame on this government, as I said earlier in question period, for putting $2 million into a gaming operation, at the same time refusing to get involved with the plight of students and people working for the Cape Breton Victoria School Board. Shame on this government. On the one hand, saying that VLTs are a curse and then taking an ownership position in the same company that's selling them, but can't find money to look after people who are working for nothing. Shame on this government, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our party, and I believe all fair-minded Nova Scotians, realize that this government at some point is going to have to get involved in this situation. The minister can stand in his place here and say he's not getting involved, but he is going to get involved at some point. We know that. It's inevitable. So why prolong the agony? Why prolong the problems in the board? Why prolong the situation where students cannot go to school and workers, many of them friends of mine and other members from Cape Breton, are out on a picket line for no good reason? Why my 3 grandchildren can't go to school? Will the minister tell me that? Why students may not be able to graduate this year? The minister hasn't addressed that. But the minister is going to address it. When enough pain is spilled on the floor, the government will suddenly come up with a way to solve this problem. Because it cannot go on indefinitely, Mr. Speaker. It cannot go on indefinitely. Now, Mr. Speaker, again, like I said, I don't certainly want to ramp up any more rhetoric than's already been going on here in this House. But I believe Nova Scotians, and I believe the members of this legislature want to do the right thing. I believe the members of this legislature want to do the right thing. And Mr. Speaker, it's for that reason, at this time, Mr. Speaker, I will put the question.
The honourable member for Antigonish.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to participate in this debate. And Mr. Speaker, we've heard a great deal this afternoon about the process of negotiation. Well, Mr. Speaker, the decision makers when it comes to the process of negotiation are really those who are the employer, that is the school board, and the workers who are on the picket line. They are the ones who have the responsibility of making a decision to bring about a resolution to a dispute such as this. Now, Mr. Speaker, the school board has in fact made an offer to the membership.
The honourable member for Cape Breton South on a point of order.
On a point of order, I just want to inform the House that it's obvious that this minister has been up as the point man, is now on his feet to try and talk this resolution out instead of letting it come to a vote, and that's what should happen with this resolution. Let this crowd, let it come to a vote. Let them show us whether they're in favor of this, of settling this dispute or not.
Order. The honourable member for Andy Ganesh has the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as I understand the rules of the House, I have the right to stand in this House and to speak to any matter that is brought before the House. That's my right. I was elected by the people of Antigonish to come here to do just that, Mr. Speaker, and that is what I intend to do this afternoon, Mr. Speaker. And if the honourable members opposite do not want they want to deny a member the opportunity to participate in the debate, then let them articulate that to the people that I represent in this legislature, Mr. Speaker. Now, as I was saying, the responsibility of resolving this rests with the school board and with the membership of the union. Now, Mr. Speaker, they are the ones who will ultimately resolve the issue. To the best of my knowledge, Mr. Speaker, the membership of the union have not had the opportunity to respond to the offer made by the school board for binding arbitration. That has not been presented to the union membership, Mr. Speaker. I will not sit down. I'll stand in my place and I'll speak as I...
Order. 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 Time has expired. Order. Time has expired for the caucus. I'll now recognize the the Liberal House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 149?
Bill number 149. I'll recognize the honourable member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, before I make some remarks on Bill 149, as a member from the Strait area, I'm sure that the good people of Antigonish would be very interested in knowing that their member they sent up here spent this time in the House and trying to talk out a resolution rather than allowing it to go to a vote to end the strike. And, you know, I think it would be more than appropriate that the people of Antigonish be made aware exactly of what their member was doing.
Order. Order. The honourable member for Antigonish on a point of privilege.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when I'm given an opportunity to present my position in this House, Mr. Speaker, I intend to use that position. And the point I made was that the membership did not get a chance to decide on a very important question, and that is valid debate point, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Richmond has the floor.
You know, Mr. Speaker, that member's been in this House long enough to know that his purpose in standing up today was to speak out the time to make sure that this matter didn't come to a vote, and that was something that's been done by governments many a times. And for him to plead ignorance, and you know, it's unfortunate because that it's the Minister of Health that got up to do it, because it's usually a role that's reserved for others. And I know the member from Guysborough Harbour certainly been doing enough barking here.
I have to remind the member that we're talking on Bill 149.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And certainly in speaking on that bill, again, it's too bad the mayor from Guysborough Harbour, it certainly has a lot of barking to do, that he wouldn't have stood in this place and spoke on this bill. But anyways, it's interesting. It's interesting. It's interesting. It's interesting, Mr. Speaker, because you know,
Order. Order. The honourable member for Richmond has the floor.
Yeah, well, thank you, Speaker. It's interesting, the Minister of Health didn't like it when my colleague was trying to get him to determine what he was going to say, but he seems more than happy to bark over instructions from his side. You know, Mr. Speaker, I can appreciate the frustration of this government, because they know what they're doing is unconscionable, and allowing 18,500 students to be out of classes is just unacceptable. Which brings me right back to the issue we have here. Because once again, this government knows that what they're proposing for VLT is unconscionable. They know themselves, because you know what, Mr. Speaker? Every member in this House has either a member of their family, a neighbor, or someone they know who has had to face financial ruin because of these machines. Every single one in this House. And if the member from Colchester North doesn't have any, I'm left to conclude he doesn't have many friends to start off with, or that he certainly doesn't know too many people in his riding. Because if he was a representative of his riding, he'd be able to tell us in this House that he's riding and his residents have also suffered by these VLTs. And if he says that there's not one person in Colchester North that has seen financial ruin because of this, then shame on him. Shame on him. And I hope the people of Colchester North know that that's what he was saying here in this House, that he's not aware of one person who's riding that has been negatively impacted. More importantly, is the impact it has had on our small communities, the impact it has had on our church groups, on our community halls, on our volunteer groups. And maybe the member from Colchester North is not aware of any problems that they've encountered since VLTs have been brought in. Maybe he's not aware of any halls that are facing closure, any bingos that have been stopped that were for church groups, student bursaries that are no longer going to be offered because they can't raise the money anymore. The money's been leaving the communities. When you have a community of Ilmadam that is seeing $30,000 to $40,000 leaving per week, that is just, it cannot be sustained. We're too small. And how many other communities are out there that are seeing that kind of money being drained out of their communities? It's something that's been seen around the province. And yet, what does the government respond with? A half measure. But is that something we should be surprised? Not at all. It was a half measure for smoking. It just wouldn't go all the way. Yet in the Strait area, I'm proud to say that almost all of our municipal units, certainly the ones in Antigonish, Inverness, and Richmond, took the initiative and they banned public smoking. They didn't wait for this government. Yet, what did they do? The government refuses to go all the way. What did they do with the loan remission program? They said, we're going to bring it back. They brought back half the program, half the funding. Another half measure. And then we have this issue of VLTs. Mr. Speaker, we've heard the stories. We've heard the personal accounts. We've heard of the community groups that have been affected. And we're going to hear from more, because more and more people are coming forward, and they're seeing the devastation that this has caused. Now, Mr. Speaker, it's not a matter of losing $100 or losing $1,000. When you see that people are saying they lost $270,000 over the years, that's an amazing amount of money. When you now know, this government knows that of the revenues coming from VLTs, 50% of that revenue is coming from problem gamblers. And yet the government says we're going to reduce the machines by 1,000, and we're going to take out the stop button and stop gambling at midnight. So you can lose your shirt right up till midnight now. That's the government's response. Mr. Speaker, it is clearly unacceptable, because this is where Nova Scotia, we're looking for leadership. And I'm proud to say that our leader and our caucus, and certainly with the direction of the MLA for Citadel, said that we've got a serious social problem here. And the solution to that is to rid this province of VLTs. Now, Mr. Speaker, when I hear the Premier of this province, who's a family doctor, I think he's someone of honor, I have no doubt of that, and I think Nova Scotians believe that. But when we hear him talking about South Carolina, this is Nova Scotia. We're not South Carolina. I can tell you that in Arishat, if you take out the VLTs, no one's going underground or going to organized crime to gamble. And if someone's going to open up underground gambling in Richmond County, everyone knows everyone in Richmond County. Well, how are you going to hide it? It's just, the argument's just not even practical. It's almost to the point of being foolish. And then the Premier first gets up and he recites all these numbers, and each day there's someone to contradict his numbers. And yet he continues to go along that organized crime, the Hells Angels are taking over the province, we're going to have all this underground thing. When you have mothers who are coming forward and saying how much money they've lost, they're not going to gamble underground in some hidden area or somewheres, some basement or some dark alley. Where they're gambling now is right in the wide open. It's in the local Legion. You know, and I got to tell you, Mr. Speaker, to hear the Premier say he's going to protect Legions, I can tell you, my community, that's where all the problem gamblers are. Red Legion. I have a small Legion that's got 11 machines. It's got a bank machine next to the bar. Now, who would have thought we'd see today that you'd have a bank machine in a Legion, a community center, and 11 VLTs? That's where the problem gamblers are in my community. And yet the idea that this plan will not in any way address that is clearly unacceptable. The government's plan, that is. We've brought forward a bill that is responsible, because that bill has three major steps. 50% reduction by the end of 2005, a total ban in 3 years, which gives businesses, Legions, and other groups a chance to adjust and to make necessary changes, and then a change in the law. A change in the law. Because, you know, and I'm sure the member from Colchester North, who's certainly always big to talk about police and that here in this House, would know that changes in the laws that would say that mere possession of a VLT is enough to be convicted would do exactly what police need to do to be able to control this. And here in this province, Mr. Speaker, anyone who's got a licensed establishment, we already have liquor inspectors in place. A liquor inspector walks in to a bar that has illegal VLTs. You don't hide these things. They're quite large and they're quite heavy. You don't sneak them out in a corner. So we've already got liquor inspectors going in, and then we've got already our RCMP and municipal police forces. To suggest that they cannot do their job, I think is a complete disservice to those people who serve our province so well each and every day. And it's an awful shame that this government would say, I don't trust the police to be able to keep law and order in this province, which is why I say I need to keep VLTs. But what's even more troubling, Mr. Speaker, is I was here in 1998. Unlike some of the members on the government side, I was here. I was sitting on that side. And I heard the Premier, who's then leader of the third party at the time, the Conservative Party, say he wanted a moratorium on the amount of VLTs. No more. And we've all heard the quotes that he gave of how addictive they were becoming and everything. He said, no more. I give you my word, no more. We passed it. We passed it. I'm not sure how the NDP voted. I think they may at the time, I think they did support the legislation as well. I believe there was all-party support for it, if I'm not mistaken, and maybe the leader of the NDP can correct me, but I do believe it was all-party support. But lo and behold, while we're all sitting back thinking, there's a moratorium on the machines, here's the Premier and the Minister of Justice and the Minister of Finance signing deals with the native bands in Nova Scotia to add more machines. Well, what's the use of a moratorium if you're going to keep signing deals to add more machines on top of it? See, because their argument of saying, well, we had to respect our deal with the natives, that could have been done by using the existing stock. Instead, this was a sneaky way of going and adding more machines in this province. So add to the burden. So, Mr. Speaker, I got to tell you, it really did surprise me when I learned that, because I didn't think on this issue that the Premier had been able to establish his reputation on one of those planks, that he would go and break that commitment to Nova Scotians. And that's the situation we find ourselves in today. We have more machines today than we had in 1998. How did that happen? There's no one else in power but the Conservatives and this Premier, not that I'm aware of. So this happened under their own watch, their own commitment, which was broken by them. Mr. Speaker, I have to say a few words. I know that the NDP caucus, which as soon as we released our intentions and our bill, we did seek their support. We did ask them to support us in this initiative. We believe that they would see that this was a serious matter and one that was deserving of their support. I must say, Mr. Speaker, that I was extremely disappointed personally to see that the position put forward by the NDP was to suggest that there be a plebiscite. Mr. Speaker, if there's one thing we've learned from this government is that if you let them set up a plebiscite, and they're going to rig it to make sure that it's got the results that they wanted. And I can tell you, that's what we saw in Sunday shopping. They made sure that they put that question in such a form that it was going to get the intended result. So to even suggest that we should trust this government to do another plebiscite on this kind of issue is just not acceptable. Mr. Speaker, I have to tell you, not only is that upsetting that to go to a plebiscite, but then when Nova Scotians are looking for leadership on this, the leader of the NDP says, well, I'm not going to tell you how I'd vote if there is a plebiscite. And the member from Dartmouth North says, I'm not going to tell you how I'd vote either. Speaker, we've made it quite clear what our position is. Nova Scotians know. And Speaker, I have to tell you that when it came to the issue of seniors in long-term care, we didn't need a plebiscite to tell us that was wrong. The NDP didn't need a plebiscite. We didn't need a plebiscite. It was clear that that was a wrong. When it came to the issue of them putting forward public auto insurance, they didn't need a plebiscite to learn that either.
Order, please. Thank you. All members' time's up. Expired. Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm happy to have the opportunity to enter in this debate on the bill brought forward by the Liberal caucus today. I will be sharing my time with the member from Inverness as we debate this. Mr. Speaker, I guess the issue that this bill has raised, and I did hear the honourable member speaking about the bill and the 50% reduction, and in turn looking at this and increasing the fines for offences and going on. But Mr. Speaker, the point of all of this, the point of the strategy, the point of all of the gaming announcements has been the fact that it is a three-pronged attack, if you will. It's got to do with getting treatment for people who have realized that particular addiction. It has the issue of trying to prevention. And Mr. Speaker, we've been very clear that as the program moves forward, it's going to be monitored. It's going to be monitored to looking at how this is developing. We indicated there would be another prevalence study. We indicated that it would be evaluating all of the results of the various techniques that we've talked about, whether it's reducing the speed of machines, taking the speed out. Mr. Speaker, we can all talk about whether you want to talk about North Carolina or whatever, but the fact is that the experience in other jurisdictions tells us that the market for illegal VLTs is there. And if the government is not involved in regulation, that it will become, as it did before regulation in this province, it will become a part of regulation. Well, the honourable member from Richmond says it's a matter of enforcement. I would point to the honourable member back before 1993, before the Act came in, and ask him if he believes or if he understands that there were machines in this province at that point in time. You can always talk about the enforcement. You can always talk about enforcement. We can go into the question of Ontario and how they've increased their enforcement. We can go through all of those statistics, Mr. Speaker, but the fact is that this business seems to attract illegal machines if there is not the regulation. Mr. Speaker, one of the main thrusts in this strategy and what we put forward is that we believe one of the solutions in this is treatment for problem gamblers. People have to have the treatment, and whether it's this addiction or other addictions, Mr. Speaker, you have to have the treatment there for people. You have to try to do prevention and move from making the opportunities available. You have to try to make it so that people realize and understand what this problem can do and how they're getting this. You have to make those available for them. So that's what we were moving forward. Now, when you start down this road, Mr. Speaker, and the honourable member mentioned that it's in his legion in Richmond that there are these VLTs. Well, in my riding, there's VLTs not only in the legion, but they're in a variety of places. And people go there, and people use these others. But Mr. Speaker, I can say to you that since we've put forward this strategy, I have had people come and say, this is one of the first steps, one of the first governments in Canada to start moving in this direction, to start looking at this as a real problem and starting to deal with it. And, Mr. Speaker, that's what we were saying in the strategy. You're developing these areas that you're going to work in, and then you have to evaluate them. We have to know how these are working. Now, Mr. Speaker, maybe what they really meant to say in the budget that the Liberals brought forward is we're going to reduce and we're going to go down to zero, and then we're never going to evaluate. Maybe that's not what we're talking about here. Maybe they're just simply saying here that we will get people to look at monitoring these, and we'll increase the fines. But who's going to? What the assumption here is that we're going to add a lot more police to attempt and go do that. So, Mr. Speaker, I think as this government, as we put forward the plan, we had spent a year of time. We had spent a year going through a strategy review. We have asked people to put these through. We've asked people to make their opinions felt. We've looked at all of these different things, Mr. Speaker, and we are not only that, but we initiated the Gaming Awareness Week. We initiated all those things so that we could get people to make their comments. We could get people. So, Mr. Speaker, when you bring forward a plan, it has to be a comprehensive plan, and it has to have a sense of direction, and it has to be evaluated. And that's what we need to do. So, Mr. Speaker, I will thank you for allowing me to debate, and I'll return this time to the member from Inverness.
The Honourable Minister of Tourism and Culture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and through you to the House, Mr. Speaker, and to my member. My fellow colleague who spoke on the bill that's in front of us. Mr. Speaker, this has been an issue on the minds of a lot of Nova Scotians during the past number of months, and has received a great deal of media attention, received a great deal of attention in this House as well, Mr. Speaker, and I think that's positive. I think it's positive, Mr. Speaker, in light of the fact that we do have a problem in our province. We have a problem that, Mr. Speaker, that I know in health promotion we take very seriously. It's an issue, Mr. Speaker, that does affect many lives in our province, many family and friends and people like that, Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is we have put forward a strategy, and that strategy has been put forward to not only take a look at the number of machines, but has taken a look at a much more broader approach. And what I think is unfortunate, and what I haven't heard coming from the opposition, and perhaps the NDP will be speaking to this issue as well, but I certainly didn't hear it from the Liberals, Mr. Speaker, on the area of prevention and promotion. And I think this is equally as important because we have individuals who are addicted in our province. Mr. Speaker, I was very pleased with the investment we have made in regard to this a couple of weeks ago. In fact, the additional $3 million makes our province per capita the second province in our country for expenditure with regards to those two areas, specifically for gambling addictions. So I think that speaks to the seriousness that we feel regarding this issue and the seriousness that we place in ensuring that the resources are there to treat those who need our help. And, Mr. Speaker, those resources are being targeted in many ways. And I know that the members have probably taken a look at that strategy, but there's a number of things happening. Development and evaluation, development, evaluate, demonstration, treatment, research project. And that's important because the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, for addictions in our province, we have many individuals working on cross addictions, many individuals working in addiction services. But we need a greater focus on the gaming side, and we're bringing that focus. We also need better research on how to treat these individuals, and over $500,000 is going to help do that. We're going to develop and implement an early identification intervention program, Mr. Speaker, which is also very important, especially when you take a look at the number of at-risk gamblers that we have in our province, and that has been done through the problem gambling index, Mr. Speaker, which is done every, I think it's every 4 to 5 years. I think it's every 5 years that is done. And, Mr. Speaker, that has shown us that we do have a number of at-risk, and that's why those programs are so vital. Mr. Speaker, we're also increasing problem gambling treatment resources to our district health authorities. Our district health authorities are in a tremendous position through addiction services in ensuring that the needs of that particular region of the province are met. And they are certainly can play a critical role and are playing a critical role with respect to that. And we had a debate during question period yesterday, Mr. Speaker, regarding the Gaming Foundation. And certainly there are opportunities for all groups to apply for funding, Mr. Speaker. There's opportunities through the grants programs. There's opportunities, Mr. Speaker, through the district health authorities. And there are opportunities now, which wasn't there before, on a new program through our community health boards based on the interest garnered through money which has been accumulating over a number of years. So it's a responsible approach, and it's being done through the district health authorities. We're also going to do further work on enhancing our gaming strategy, and we have money set aside for that. Equal to that, Mr. Speaker, if you want to launch a program such as this, you have to ensure that social marketing plays a key role, and that is being done. The gambling helpline, we've seen a dramatic increase in that as a result of investing the needed funds to ensure that people are aware of that. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I believe at the times it's between 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the morning we've seen a substantial increase, simply by ensuring that on television that I forget which particular, I guess it's the local community station where it's rolling all the time, that line is highlighted. And that is important because we are trying to target the individuals which need our help. Mr. Speaker, education programs are equally as important for our seniors, for our youth, in our schools. And also, Mr. Speaker, developing and implementing a community-based prevention program. So, Mr. Speaker, we need to take a look at a number of avenues. And this, again, as I've said, has disappointed me because I have heard very little, if anything, from the members of the third party with regards to this issue. And I think that all Nova Scotians will take a look at the government's plan, and those who have taken a look at the plan say it's a balanced approach, hence the name on the strategy, Mr. Speaker, a balanced approach, a balanced strategy. Now, the Liberals, Mr. Speaker, I had to laugh, and I'm certainly don't want to go off the bill, but I did hear the member talking about education, Mr. Speaker, and speaking because education is tied into our strategy. I remember the farce that they had when they were in government with respect to education, what they did to the Strait Regional School Board and many other school boards, Mr. Speaker, and that affected the types of programs you were offering, such as gaming and addictions and all that sort of thing in our programs, for whether it was our PDR programs or physically active lifestyles. I remember what they did to our schools, Mr. Speaker, and the people of our province remember. And we will certainly see, Mr. Speaker, the members, I hear them chirping now, Mr. Speaker, I obviously hit a nerve with them.
Order, please. Thank you. The honourable member's time has expired. The honourable leader of the official opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very pleased to be able to join in on this debate this evening. As was mentioned by the members opposite and by my colleagues on this side of the House, this is a very important debate, and it is certainly one for which I would like to extend some credit for the raising of this debate to the member from Halifax Citadel, and also to several people who are here in the gallery today who have done a lot of work in trying to raise the profile of this issue. And I'd like to get something out of the way right at the very beginning of this debate, and that's this, that the members of this caucus will support this bill going forward to law amendments if it should come to a vote. And the reason why we're going to do that is that we feel it's extraordinarily important that this debate take place. And that this debate take place in as many different forms as it can take place, because it needs to be explored, it needs to be considered not only by the people here in this House, but I believe, by the people of this province, because I fundamentally believe it's about a societal value. It's about deciding what level of gambling we want to allow in our communities, in our province. And this is a very serious question, and it's not one that is just relies on our opinion. It's not one that we discovered, by the way, because the debates around gambling and gaming go back for as long as there has been legislatures, as long as there have been governments. It is gaming and these industries have been around practically forever, Mr. Speaker. And I'm hopeful, and as the members of the Liberal Party know, we also have a bill before this House, and we are hopeful that if we have the opportunity to call it for debate, that they will support our bill going forward, because the essential thing is that it provides an opportunity or a space for this debate to take place. Our bill would allow the people of the province to make that decision once and for all. And it doesn't rely, and this is, I think, a key point that I wanted to make, Mr. Speaker, and it doesn't rely on who's in the chamber. It doesn't rely on a program that's going to take place in 3 or 4 years. It means that the decision is going to be made by the people on a fixed date, on a fixed question. And the member for Richmond said, well, we don't know what the question would be. Well, if he read the bill, he would know that, in fact, the bill, if they pass our bill, the bill sets out a very simple, very concise question to which the answers are yes and no. That's yes or no, whichever one the people would choose. And that idea to have a plebiscite, I'd like to take credit for it, but the reality is that it has also been around for a long time, and I know that my colleague, Mr. Estabrooks, introduced into this House, I think more than a year ago, a petition with thousands of names on it asking for a province-wide plebiscite. And in fact, again, I know Mr. Walsh and his organization, the Volts organization, were the people who collected those signatures and passed them along to Mr. Estabrooks to table, which he was very pleased to do. Mr. Speaker, in the process that went on, we asked through the omnibus poll with Corporate Research Associates for them to place a question on their poll between, I think it was February 10th and March 5th, to ask whether or not people would like to have a plebiscite. And you know, Mr. Speaker, a resounding 81% of the respondents said that there should be either a provincial-wide plebiscite or at the very least a community allowance for a community-by-community plebiscite on whether or not there ought to be gaming in their community. And I'm going to table a copy of those poll results for your edification. I think it's an important indication of the way that the people of this province feel about their right to have some say on this very important question. I know that very recently an informal group met with the Liberal caucus, and they said, according to the Chronicle Herald reports, that they wanted to increase the pressure on the minority Tories to reduce its relying on gambling revenue, and it also wants to continue to push for a plebiscite on banning video lottery terminals. And Mr. Speaker, that is as recently as February 8th, and I'll just table that so you can have a chance to have a look at it, and if anyone else would like to have a look at it, they can look at it as well. Mr. Speaker, we're joined in this call by who else but by the addictions experts who come from the government's own departments. Before public accounts on Wednesday, April 13th, Mr. LaRocque, when asked about the question of a plebiscite, said, "We pride ourselves in living in a democratic society. We prohibit Sunday shopping in this province because we believe somehow that it intrudes on our values and impinges on the sensibilities of people who have religious beliefs and such, and I can respect that." And then he was asked specifically whether or not there should be a referendum, and he said, "Oh, absolutely. I think they should, and I think the impact could either take place through a plebiscite, an overall plebiscite, or by providing municipalities with the opportunity to make determinations based on how they perceive the level of damage and the challenges they face at the local level." Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was joined in this, oddly enough, by the member from Halifax Citadel in a column that he wrote, leaders column, dated the 4th of November, 2002, in which, and this I think is a very articulate examination of the issue. He says, "It was here that Joseph Howe argued passionately and successfully for freedom of speech. Citizen-centered democracy is another chapter in that history of reform. I have said that citizen-centered democracy is about trust. Pundits, legislatures, and think tanks lament the declining confidence of the public in government. I suggest the unaddressed problem is that government has lost confidence in the people. Nova Scotians care about their communities and about public issues, but government doesn't trust them to play a meaningful role in the decisions about our common future. Government has to restore the trust of citizens, starting by trusting citizens to participate more fully and more substantially in the decision-making process. That is why citizen-centered democracy includes mechanisms for meaningful citizen initiatives, citizen-initiated referenda, with reasonable limits to ensure that the referendum question is on an important question of province-wide concern in one of those mechanisms." Well, what could be more important, as I believe the member has said himself, than an issue such as this? Here is an opportunity for us to exercise that right that the legislature has to give to the people of Nova Scotia the right to decide an issue of importance to the people. Mr. Speaker, I couldn't help but be surprised at the selective memory of the member for Richmond County when he was speaking, because I too was in the House in 1998 when the moratorium bill came forward. In fact, the member doesn't remember, but the bill actually came forward on an NDP opposition day. We agreed, we called the Progressive Conservative bill at the time because we thought it was an important thing to do. And you know what the member doesn't remember? He doesn't remember that the members on that side, the members of the Liberal Party, stood up and they vociferously and passionately defended gaming and gambling and VLTs. And the Minister of Finance said, we cannot allow ourselves to go back to the period when there were grey machines, when there were thousands of illegal machines. That's what the members of the Liberal Party said then. And that is why it's so important to come to a plebiscite, because you know something? Then it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who sits on those benches. It doesn't matter who sits on these benches. It doesn't matter who sits on those benches, because the people will have the opportunity to make the decision. And we don't have to worry. We don't have to worry about the fact that the Liberal Party has had some 16 or 18 different positions on gaming over the last number of years. We don't have to worry about that. We don't have to worry about who's actually sitting in those seats, if anyone, because the decision will have been made by the people of Nova Scotia. So that's why it's important, Mr. Speaker, to use the mechanism that has already been used by this province, Mr. Speaker. As you are well aware, in the matter of Sunday shopping, I couldn't suggest for a second that Sunday shopping would be as important a matter as this one is. Mr. Speaker, and I do worry about that, despite the fact that the member says, oh, grey machines, yeah, everybody would know where they are and all of that. I worry about that because I had people in my office the other day saying they had grey machines that they were simply going to wheel back out. So, Mr. Speaker, I don't buy it. I think he's right in this regard, that it means investing more money in enforcement, and if people really want to keep them out, they can do it. But I just want to, I want to make that point. Mr. Speaker, I realize that we're winding down to the last moment, and I do believe that this bill is very sincerely introduced. I do believe that what the member for Halifax Citadel, what the members of the Liberal Party are trying to do is to elevate the level of debate here. We support that, and we will support the bill.
Recognize the member for Halifax Citadel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think many of my caucus colleagues would say that 12 minutes is but a flick of time that I would begin to talk about VLTs in. So I've thought a bit about what I would say today, and I realize that I've said most of what I have to say on this particular matter. I'll continue to say it as often as I need to. I could do it for 12 hours, but there are people who are with us now and people who are beginning to speak out across this province who have much more to say than I have to say, and with the greatest respect of all the members who are here in the legislature today, have much more to say and much more knowledge about this than we do. Some of them are with us here today. Not all the people who I'm about to introduce are problem gamblers. They're people who are concerned nonetheless about this problem, and I'd ask them to stand and be acknowledged as I call out their names. Don Swinimer from Sackville. Halim Nasrallah from Halifax. Pat Parker, who has been helping on this issue for a long time. John Dunsworth, as everyone knows, is an advocate, was introduced a little while. I'm not sure if Regan Fraser is still up in the East Gallery. If he is, he's standing. We also have President John Alphonse, who's with the Musicians Union, expressing concerns about the challenges facing musicians. And last but not least, we have the pioneer, the person who has been after us for a long period of time to finally listen to the truth about this issue and recognize that it is wrong for government to be in this business. And we have the opportunity to fix something. It is the voice of those people that needs to come through in this legislature. And so when I was thinking about what I might say, I realized that it's really more important to speak about what other people are saying on this issue. If anyone would go to the Game Over VLT's website and look at the stories of the people who have been plagued by these, the number of stories has been growing and growing. They'll realize the kind of impact that this is having in people in their living rooms and kitchens across this province. Stories that have been kept silent from family members, and now the silence is beginning to break. I give you a story about Jane. Jane says, "My husband worked for the government and went on short-term leave due to the gambling. And then in 2000, he went on long-term disability because of several attempted suicides. He was mentally and verbally abusive when he couldn't get money to gamble. He doesn't play the VLTs anymore, though. He committed suicide in 2002 at the age of 39. Now I have a life without a husband, and my young 8-year-old has no father. This was the ultimate cost of the VLTs." At that website, you'll also see comments from seniors, and a report was released by St. Mary's professors earlier today about the challenges that seniors are facing uniquely with respect to this problem. I'll give you Shirley's story, Shirley McKinnon from Lower Sackville. She says, "When my husband passed away, I received a $75,000 insurance policy. All I have to show for it is 2 pieces of furniture. The rest went into the VLTs. I also used my 2 credit cards for gambling and had to get a loan for $23,000 to pay them off and have nothing to show for the debt. I had to go to the food bank at one point as I had no money for groceries. I haven't gambled for about 3 years now, but at the age of 70, I should have been having a much more relaxing and enjoyable time in my life instead of still paying on debts with nothing to show for it."
Order, please. Now, member from Halifax Central has the floor.
Then there's Gerald's story. Gerald says, "I borrowed money from my friends, had a loan at the bank, and used credit cards. I also sold my house and gambled away the profit from it. While I'm still married, my wife left me because of my gambling. My son had been hurt deeply by this and is so disappointed, resulting in losing the trust I had with him. The gambling has greatly affected my health, causing severe depression and several long stays at the Nova Scotia hospital. I have lost all of my confidence and am so ashamed and filled with guilty feelings. I am 69 years old, a time in my life when I should be able to enjoy myself, but all of that is gone." L. Gerald Roach from the Halifax area. Then there's a story from John from Halifax. "I borrowed money from family and friends and then started using credit cards and bank loans, all to chase my losses. I had to go bankrupt in 1997 because of the gambling. My marriage of 25 years broke up over my gambling, and there are wounds that will never heal. I can't seem to get over the shame of it all." And then there's Jane's story. "I would spend any cash that I had and used an overdraft at the bank. I borrowed money from family and friends and would pawn or sell personal items. I lost $10,000 in RSP investments and eventually went bankrupt for $40,000, mostly for the VLTs. My health was also greatly affected and I suffered anxiety attacks. I would gamble for days and then spend days in bed." And finally, there's Steve's story. "I started to lose hope of ever stopping for good. When I was not playing, I felt anxious and could only think of the next time I can play. I started obsessing with death, feeling the only way I will stop is when my life is over. I had nothing to lose. My life had become a sick cycle of stopping and failing. The only thought that stopped me from giving up or even committing a crime to continue playing VLTs was my children. I didn't want them to suffer that kind of legacy or come visit me in prison. They deserve the best father out there, and I just wasn't that guy. I do know that I was spiritually bankrupt, like the Walking Dead, not in control of my own will." These are just a few of the stories, Mr. Speaker, that finally people are showing the courage to speak out about. Bernie Walsh, who I mentioned earlier today and didn't mention his name, was the person who stayed in the wilderness for a long period of time and spoke about this. Many other people are showing courage now, and I would say the courage of our leader, Francis McKenzie, to take a strong position with respect to this matter is another person who needs to be acknowledged on this particular day. There are options and there are myths. And I appreciate what the Premier attempted to do back in 1998. And when I started today thinking about what it is that I would speak about, I thought about going back to the Premier's comments, often quoted from 1998, expressing his concern about the problems of VLTs in this province. I don't doubt his sincerity at the time. But more and more Nova Scotians are asking questions. The actions taken by this government by reducing this number by 1,000 might appear on the surface to be a step in the right direction. But what it really means is that the slow machines that we have in this province will become fast machines. The ones that aren't so busy will become busy machines. And ultimately, the people who are stuck in the madness of VLT problem gambling will continue for a long period of time. The figures that have been quoted by the Premier and others about whether or not this is a fixable problem in other jurisdictions are just not credible. I don't want to go through the fact that nothing has been mentioned after reference to British Columbia. Not a single thing has been mentioned about how many illegal machines are in British Columbia. I won't talk about whether or not Mr. Lee, Vice Lee from South Carolina, has actually given quite contradictory comments about the state of the problem in South Carolina, which is quite contrary to what the research actually tells us. I just want to say this is a fixable problem. This is something that Nova Scotians increasingly can be proud to say that we're taking concrete action on. The minister responsible for the Office of Health Promotion got it backwards, I would suggest, when he suggested that we were focusing on that they were focusing on the prevention side of this. The prevention side of this, Mr. Speaker, is to get rid of the machines. That's the only thing that's going to ultimately make this problem go away. What the government has been focused on is the treatment side, which has for a long period of time required attention. 15,000 problem gamblers in the province of Nova Scotia, and less than 1,000 of them received treatment. And back in December of this year, this government saw fit to take $4 million that was created exclusively by VLT gamblers, most of that money from problem gamblers, for problem gamblers, and diverted it to other purposes. I'm pleased to see that the new $3 million money is going back in. I think it comes as a result of so many people saying that it was wrong to do this in the first place. But what the government's principal focus is on treating the problem. And if your focus is on just trying to make a complaint go away, a public policy issue disappear, then you're going to get the results that we've gotten with respect to this plan that was announced a few weeks ago. But if your focus is on fixing the problem, if your determination is to help the people who are in their homes struggling with this every day, 10 suicides a year, then you start with a different story. You spend your time asking your officials to give you good information. You spend your time ensuring that the voice of somebody like John LaRock is heard in the Premier's office, in the Cabinet office, instead of getting the nonsense we got last week from Mr. LaRock when he had to appear before the Public Accounts Committee showing great courage and indicating that he wasn't, that the foundation document for this strategy was wasn't one that he could support, that he wasn't involved in the ultimate construction of this particular plan that's going forward. He's the province's gaming strategy specialist. And to find out that the material used to create the Responsible Gaming Week material for last year is alleged now to have been cooked on false information from focus groups suggests entirely that this government is caught in the same addictions as some of the people who are in the gallery here. This is fundamentally a situation where government needs to recognize the nature of its problem. And it happens in the Department of Finance, it happens in Treasury and Policy Board. It's got to happen right through the line. Increasingly, we realize that this is the right thing to do. And research is coming forward to suggest that not only will this not be a loss to the government, this will have a positive economic effect. The research is sound. We intend to bring it forward. This can be done. The people of Nova Scotia are expecting the men and women in this legislature to serve and protect them. That responsibility rests especially with the government. This is a great opportunity for Nova Scotia to be a beacon to the rest of the country, and I say now's the time to do it. Thank you very much.
Recognize the Honourable Minister of Community Services. Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I got to tell you that 8 months ago, I couldn't believe.
Time allotted for a debate on this bill has expired.
I couldn't believe
The Honourable Member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That completes our business for today. Thank you.
You'll call upon the Honourable Government House Leader for tomorrow's hours and order of business, please.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow, Mr. Speaker, the House will sit from 2 until 6, and following the daily routine and question period, the order of business will be public bills for second reading, and perhaps we will go on committee of the whole on bills. The bills that we'll be considering, Mr. Speaker, will be Bill number 147, 148, 152, 153, and 156, 157, 158, 159, and 160. So, Mr. Speaker, with those few remarks, I move the House to now rise.
Motion is the House adjourned to 2 p.m. tomorrow. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The House adjourned to 2 p.m. We've reached the moment of interruption. The honourable member for Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, and indeed it's a great privilege to speak about this topic. In 1994, after I moved from New Brunswick to Nova Scotia to accept the pastoral charge in the pro-church, I was introduced, because the church was centered in one of the prime agricultural areas in Nova Scotia, in fact in Canada. I was introduced to many of the problems